Welcome to the Melting Pod, stories about our dysfunctional immigration system and where we go from here. As your co-hosts, we've served inside the federal government for 2 decades and 4 presidents of both parties.
I'm Claire Trickler-McNulty, and I focus on ICE and immigration enforcement.
I'm Amanda Baran, and I work mostly on humanitarian-based immigration and immigrant women's issues.
I'm Doug Rand, and I focus on work-based immigration and U.S. citizenship.
Welcome to the Melting Pod. It's been a while. Claire, Doug, how are y'all doing?
Good. I'm a little tiny bit jet lagged from getting back from Ireland last night, but otherwise feeling pretty good.
That's
how was
dedication.
Ireland?
It was amazing. I'm a big fan. It was great. It was also fun talking politics with people. They were pretty open to conversation.
Another podcast, perhaps we can talk about that. That sounds very interesting. What about you, Doug?
I'm good. It's a gray day in D.C., but can't complain.
Great. Well, I'm also doing pretty well. It is a great day in DC, but my plants are really happy for the water because I've been watering them. And I'm hoping that, they will bloom a lot this summer. Hopefully we get more rain. So I'm really excited about having this conversation. I've been wanting to have it for a while. And if you care about immigration and about how we talk about it and how it feels as though sometimes we're losing an argument, even when we have facts on our side, this episode is for you. And we are so lucky to have our guest today, Beatriz Lopez, a brilliant communication strategist and immigration advocate who has spent years at the intersection of policy, messaging, and movement building. And we're going to get into the narrative strategy around immigration, how we got here and where we go from here. We'll be talking about shifting public opinion, what the data's been telling us, how it informed the run-up to the 2024 election, and what it actually looks like to rebuild a winning message from the ground up. But before we get into all of that, Beatriz, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here and talk shop with you guys.
Yeah. And, before I give you the floor to talk shop, I would like for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. We love hearing stories about how people got into the work and what drives people, take it away.
Sure. My name is Beatriz Lopez, and I'm actually the executive director of Work Latino and also the founder director of Democracy Power Project. And I'm really happy to be doing this work. And I've been doing this work for a long time. I'm the daughter of Nicaraguan immigrants. That is sort of my first entry point into the politics of immigration. But my parents came here a very long time when the immigration system was a little bit different, a little easier, I would say. My parents came with nothing but built a lot in Miami, Florida. And then since then, I grew up in a very Latino-heavy community, as you might imagine, in Miami, Florida. But I really got my taste of what immigration means and how it had shifted in the U.S. when I served for Peace Corps in El Salvador. I worked with a lot of the children who were left behind by their parents who immigrated to the U.S. So I was really predominantly working with the kids. And I think I saw the cost of what a broken immigration system does to the children who can't see their parents for years or who are called upon suddenly to go on their own and make that journey by themselves to be reunited with their parents in the U.S. And since then, I've been working in that area of work with the Service Employees International Union, really trying to push immigration policy forward. And now with Work Latino, and previous to that, Immigration Hub, where we really sort of stood up that organization to handle the first Trump administration. And so now here I am with this wealth of knowledge trying to still get us past the threshold and do some good trouble.
Oh, awesome. What an amazing background you have. So impressive. And I didn't know that about the Peace Corps. That must have been really intense.
It was, but I did meet my husband there. So there's that.
Well, that's great. So let's get into it, or let's melt into it. My kids tell me that's cringe whenever I say that, but
and yet a lot of my friends my age think it's great. So that just tells you something about the generation gap.
So let's just start with the big picture. We know that billions and billions of dollars were spent on political advertising in 2024. And yet our side, who spent a lot of that money, lost on the immigration debate. So Beatriz, can you walk us through what happened? How did immigration seep into the conventional wisdom as a losing issue for the Democratic Party?
So I can walk you back as far back. And I think where the moment happened and it was crystallized was actually in a moment that I don't think people really sort of focus on, or really it's kind of like a footnote in the history books of immigration communications. And it's looking back at the Obama days when he was running for, this was his 2012 campaign. And one of his campaign operatives actually was doing some focus groups. And in this focus groups, what they saw was that when Obama talked about immigration, he kind of was losing some of the folks in the middle. I guess he wasn't delivering talking points that were effective. But when they showed what Mitt Romney and how he was talking about immigration, what they saw was that people were actually not liking what they were hearing from Mitt Romney. So they made a campaign choice there. Hey, let's not have Obama talk about immigration or let them do their part, sort of set themselves up for failure on this issue. And as if you remember back then, he was talking about self-deportation.
Right, which at the time was just this shockingly, radically cruel thing that it made no sense why someone as kind of squishy and center of the road as Romney was saying, he was clearly serving some ugly part of the coalition.
100%, exactly. And of course that lost him, but also Mitt Romney wasn't a good candidate. But that sort of planted a seed amongst Democratic campaigns. Hey, why talk about immigration when they themselves are doing such a bad job at it? So let's not even mention immigration, but it kind of evolved there. And then you have fast forward to 2016, immigration reform fails. Democrats still deliver on, getting immigration reform even when they had a trifecta, but also there was all kinds of things that were happening, as you know, on the Republican side and shifts that were happening there. Trump comes along and he's really sort of exacerbating and really talking about 3 types of anxieties that everyday people feel, which is, one, I'm not doing better at my job. It feels like people are taking away from me instead of being able to empower me. And they're really tapping into that scarcity mentality. So that's number 1, the scarcity mentality. The number 2 thing that Trump was really effective at sort of jabbing and sort of gaining people's support was the sense of public safety, right? We already started to hear about these criminals coming into your neighborhoods, et cetera. They're making you unsafe. Democrats are not for you. They're not making you safer, et cetera. So public safety. The third one is the sense of self. Nobody is seeing me. You're caring about them. I need you to pay attention to me and what I'm trying to do. And so Trump gave them agency in all these things and was looking at all these things and telling them and othering who was the problem. It was both Democrats and immigrants as well. So immigrants are the criminals, right? They're quote unquote the Mexican rapists, et cetera. You were hearing all these things in his campaign rhetoric.
And from day one, from the moment he came down the golden escalator, that was in his speech.
100%. And there was no true pushback to that. And there was no true investment into how do we push back against this rhetoric, especially against immigrants. None of that was really happening, amongst other things that were being done in 2016. This guy, his campaign manager, Brad Prescott, was sort of genius at managing how we're going to actually target people online in particular. How do we sort of use social media to benefit Trump, but also how to micro-target people and deliver these messages much more acutely to them. This guy deployed over 1 million types of ads. To me, it's just incredible to deliver that many ads from the moment that he started campaigning, from the convention onto election day. He micro-targeted the hell out of people with these messages, just going at it and hitting on immigration, hitting on all these tropes, and really just doubling down. From there, it evolved. But in that moment, what we saw, that moment, I just want to go back to that moment to go back to your question, Amanda. That is the moment we're already starting to see that Democrats, weren't responding to those attacks, specifically on the issue of immigration, specifically on the attacks against immigrants. Already, that was shaping its way into how one side was doubling down on these tropes and seeing benefit from using these kinds of rhetorics and messages, and the other side really doubled down on their belief that people didn't care about that.
Because it wasn't a top tier issue back then. Trump was kind of a entrepreneur bringing this to the debate in a way that was much, much, much more insane than what Romney had done. Is that right?
Well, yeah. And, when we say it's not a top tier issue, it's always a top tier issue because it gets weaponized.
Right.
It gets weaponized and it gets connected to all these other issues on the economy, right? Who's taking away from your Social Security? Who's taking your job? Immigrants. Who's making America unaffordable for you? Immigrants. So that's why when I hear it's not a top tier issue, it doesn't have to be a top tier issue. It just gets weaponized across issues.
I mean, hearing all that and hearing the messaging, it definitely resonates because, was exposed to that messaging on those things. But if you're looking at 2024, going into that year, Were there major flags or warning signs that something was going wrong in the immigration side that you saw?
Yes. Going into 2024, I mean, that was the main thing is, I was working on campaign. I had a lot of research at that time. I had this wealth of research that show that you had to respond to these immigration attacks to be able to talk about the top tier issues, the kitchen table issues. And I was going to campaigns, both the Harris campaign, Biden campaign, but also other ones. And I was trying to tell them, you have to respond with a message that really talks about, one, pushes back against this, but also gives you a vision forward on immigration. And what I was getting back was like, well, we're talking about border security. And I said, that's not enough. You're not offering a vision and nobody believes you anymore on border. You've lost credibility on the issue because you didn't talk about it for the past previous years. You ceded that issue away. But it was like, it was just talking to the wall almost. You had their prescription and it was a faulty prescription. And and that's what happened post 2024. See that we lost on this issue and we look at the numbers. I mean, when you look at the spending, they didn't spend nearly enough to respond to the immigration tax. Republicans spend over $600 million on just TV ads. I'm not even talking about the digital space. On just TV ads, they spend over $600 million, and Democrats and the left spend a little less than $110 million.
That's ads about immigration.
That's ads that use immigration. All their ads, if you listen to their ads, they're really good at threading the message, right? They'll talk about the economy, but use immigration. And they'll talk about public safety and use immigration to weaponize it against Democrats. And there was never a response to that. In fact, when we looked at the ad spending, they spent more time talking about some economy and a lot of on abortion and some other issues on taxes. But you never saw across the map any focus on immigration.
Yeah.
Do you think the Democrats were scared to talk about it? What is your, read on why they didn't
it's
take it on?
Back to Amanda's question on conventional wisdom. It's really sort of become the go-to sort of strategy by the Democratic operative establishment, I would say, that they believe that immigration is not a winning issue for Democrats. It's a political loser.
So Democrats were being outspent 5-1 on immigration-related TV ads. But even if you think it was weak tea, like the $100 million they did spend, what were they saying?
Oh, they mostly spent that money talking about how they were going to be tough on the border.
Oh, so even the Democrats' ads were just border. Got it. Okay. So.
Yeah. So they were all about going after fentanyl.
So we talked about how much Republicans outspent Democrats on immigration-related ads, but overall in 2024, how much money was spent on all kinds of ads?
Yeah. So overall, 2024, the political ad spending was to date the most ever spent in an election cycle. This is going to be blown through the roof, though, in 2026, just in a midterm election.
Just in the midterms.
Imagine. Yeah, wow. Just in the midterms, we're expecting a lot because tech is very much involved in these midterm elections. In 2024, the campaigns, all across campaigns, both on the independent expenditure side and coordinated side, they spent over $10.5 billion. $10.5 billion on political ads in 2024. That is the most in any election year.
That's just on
Democrat
ads. That's just on advertising.
Just on advertising. Yeah. And that's all across ads, just as digital, connected TV ads. Yes. They spent over 10.5 billion ads.
And I think our listeners will probably be surprised to learn who spent more.
Yes. Democrats spent the most money between Republicans and Democrats. Yeah. Across the left, they spent over $762 million on just Democrats alone. Harris campaign spent $643 million, whereas the Trump campaign spent $358 million. And the Republicans Party spent $555 million.
What was the Democratic Party spending that money on? What ads were they running?
They were mostly running ads that were focused on taxes, abortion, and Medicare. Those are most of the ones that they spent on, or abortion and healthcare, but that variation, barely any money on immigration. Whereas when you look at the battleground state map and how much Republicans spent in, for instance, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, et cetera, they spent immigration, crime, and taxation or inflation. Those are their top issues. Meanwhile, there's just little spent on immigration. Two Democrats who spend the most money on talking about the border. Those two were in Montana and Ohio, who both lost. Sherrod Brown and tester.
Yeah. I just want to ask. So obviously everybody thinks ads work, right? If they're spending this much billions of dollars on them, do they work?
They work on consistency, yes. So the amount of frequency that they get, depending on who the candidate might be, ads obviously are a good layer into whatever the ground game is, right? Who's knocking on doors, etc. I think in presidential, it obviously matters. There's these gotcha moments. For instance, like the big ad that is probably memorable to most of you is when Harris said, for instance, I would not change a thing.
Yeah.
On the Biden administration. And they used that quote for images of what was happening in the border, images of what was happening to people in, on the issue of the economy. Those are the moments that political campaigns die for, right? They use that. And I think Republicans in particular are really good at sort of, again, weaponizing this issue and using it to sort of wedge it on other top tier kitchen table issues.
Yeah. And another ad, and this doesn't have to do with immigration, but I'm sure everybody remembers this ad, especially because it was run during the NFL season. And I heard it in the background all the time because my kids and husband are always watching football games in the fall, was the one about Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. And that, I think, is like a confluence of what you were saying, preying on people's fears, people's ignorance, and an issue that animated a lot of people, which is trans children and trans people, right? Like just being super fearful of something they don't know and trying to demonize them, very similar to what they're doing to immigrants.
And I mean, and when you think about the case that they use, right, on the trans issue, in particular when it came to the Harris campaign, they talk about that one case about, immigrants who are detained. There was that one case about a trans immigrant who was detained, and they used a case of how Harris wanted to support and make sure that they were protected and had some sort of ways of transitioning or giving the medical care they needed while being detained, which comes from a good place, obviously, but they completely distorted that. And so I tell you, they're really good at sort of really threading the needle on multiple issues, but always bringing it back to scapegoating immigrants and placing the blame on them for all of America's problems.
I'm not a polling and messaging expert like you are, Beatrice. So tell me if this metaphor makes sense or if it's completely dumb. But I would venture to guess that Coke and Pepsi spend about the same amount of money on marketing and that it's kind of an arms race. And if Coke ever outspent Pepsi 5-1, like Pepsi would die, right? When Republicans outspend Democrats on these really toxic messages about immigrants, what does that actually do to the electorate? Does it change people's attitudes? Does it change their votes? How does it actually work?
It completely misinforms and misconstrues the facts about our immigration system and immigrants. I think at heart, really in people's hearts, for the majority of Americans, not everybody, but really I think they feel that they're not anti-immigrant. I don't think they're at their core bad people. But what this consistent noise from the right does to people is that it really starts planting little information that have a kernel of truth maybe.
Right.
But get misconstrued completely. And so they think they assume all kinds of things about our immigration system and the people who are here. That there's chaos at the border, that there are people who shouldn't be here and who pose a threat to our country, that there's no vetting system in place, that there's no controls in place. So what I often say to folks is like, look, the majority of people aren't anti-immigrant, they're anti-chaos. What the other side has managed to do is create a chaotic picture of both the system and the people who are here. And why I say this is because when we've tested repeatedly and over the years, when we've tested, do you support a pathway to citizenship for the people who have been here for many years? And when I say many years, I start at 5. We've been here for more than 5 years, for instance. And a majority will say, yes, we support citizenship. In fact, that's why I always tell our Democratic friends, citizenship is what you should be centering your messaging on because it is the Teflon solution. You put it up against mass deportation, it wins. You put it up against any other thing that the moderate or the right put up, citizenship wins. People love that there is a legal pathway. They're like, why isn't there something in place for these people to do it? Right? They think it's as easy as getting your passport at the post office. So that to me is an indication that I try to sort of present to these folks. It's like, why are you willing to ignore that people are more supportive of pathway to citizenship than border security?
Right.
Why is it so easy for you to dismiss that?
It's such a great question. And, it makes total sense too, that if you're, blaring this anti-immigrant message into the ether and there's nothing there to push back against it, it's going to take hold, So I want to ask you another question. I mean, one of the wild cards I felt like in 2024 was Elon Musk, and his takeover of Twitter. I think that plays a big role in the story. So how did that platform shift the immigration conversation?
I would say that Elon Musk's entry point into this whole debate was kind of the cherry on the top, because there's all this noise was already happening. The Trump campaign and the Republicans have really been good at sort of doubling down on what the folks in the far right and in the fringes of social media are saying. So it bubbles up from the folks on Rumble. Think about Dan Bongino. You guys know him now, but he was very popular and is very popular, or was. I don't know how his support system is doing right now, but on Rumble.
What is Rumble?
It's a far right YouTube version app. And so this is where they go on their podcasts and YouTube and like talk all these insane things, right? So there's many people who are on that side or on the fringes of social media, and the rhetoric and message they use bubbles up. It gets picked up on other social media sites, also with the help of, when you think about, Breitbart, the Washington Examiner. So then they sort of make that messaging a little bit more sophisticated and gets pulled up into Fox News. They double down and make it sort of mainstream language. So all of that has been happening since 2016. The Pepe frog meme wars that really sort of created these anti-immigrant and very racist tropes that supported Trump, to the point where Elon Musk comes in and not only buys Twitter and makes it X, but he has a huge following. And he starts really lifting up these and amplifying these racist messages, from saying that, there's a bunch of non-citizens voting, to saying all kinds of things about fraud happening amongst immigrants voting, et cetera. And he's playing up these tropes. He's basically just putting a microscope on all these anti-immigrant messages and really starting to get that message out and sort of mainstream, make it more mainstream. And that's where the real problem comes, is when you make all these really ridiculous messages into the mainstream, and they get it from like the Great Replacement theory. They make it something that sounds normal, and it's not, and people don't know that, right? And so they're saturating the mediums and getting Elon Musk and others to sort of double down and double click on these messages, and really sort of creating a consensus way of thinking about immigration. And that's out there.
You're bringing back memories for me. And one of the things I definitely felt at ICE was this sort of triangulation between, some of the further right, let's say, think tanks, organizations, Heritage, FAIR, all those. And they would put out reports or alerts, and then you would have the House Freedom Caucus folks pick them up, put out press releases, which you would then see in, Breitbart, Daily Caller, Washington Examiner, et cetera. And it felt like this continual triangulation of messages, which is, I think, what you're saying. You would see them like it was this track. And it's interesting. Love your take on like how much are those, Washington Examiner, Breitbart, how much is that feeding in to like public understanding?
It's feeding in what they've managed to do with that, what you just described as coordination. That's what I tell people. The right is really good at coordinating. They're fully tied. There's message discipline happening all the time. They're fully connected all together. Somebody says it here on Twitter, then they say it on Fox News, then the president or somebody in the administration says it, and it continues, right? It continues and it gets amplified. And I just want to note specifically on immigration and how misinformation just spreads amongst this coordinated communications campaign that is consistently going on amongst the right, is that it becomes this sort of consensus thinking because nobody is pushing back against it. The left has been really bad about pushing back on immigration. And just to give you a bit of background, I studied this with this AI agency before it was popular to do so, to really look at how in 22, how that coordination actually happened. Because I was like, okay, it's happening, but I want to know how and who are the players, and what it could tell us about how it's going to happen in 2024. So they looked at millions upon millions and billions of posts online. And, they were able to identify sort of what are the tropes, et cetera. But the most interesting finding to me was that nobody on the left was really putting up a fight. And the one time they were putting up a fight and where you saw that it actually means something when we're all coordinated and pushing back against these anti-immigrant sort of messaging was in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, and this was before the Fetterman of today, Fetterman was running.
Then candidate for senator from Pennsylvania.
Yeah. So he was running and he was actually pretty unafraid about leaning into pro-immigration messaging. We worked a lot with his wife, putting op-eds, getting her out there on
She's an immigrant, right?
Dreamer. Yeah, she's a dreamer. She was a former
Wow.
dreamer. And so she talked about her story as a Brazilian immigrant, et cetera. And this is before influencers, like the way we're paying attention to them now. But there was a few influencers in Pennsylvania that when these things happened, they were talking bad about Fetterman on immigration, he and others would push back. And you could literally see the study sort of like how they were able to sort of just push back and inoculate and make sure that those who were spreading anti-immigrant messaging against Fetterman didn't get any more airtime. And that's because somebody was speaking up. And on top of that, we were running ads, pro-immigrant messaging ads. And so was Fetterman. He ran a great ad that talked about how immigration makes America, America. It was beautiful language. And he was unafraid and he was pushing back and he was talking about how, immigration actually makes Pennsylvania better. And case in point, his family, his wife, et cetera. So just to sort of bring us back to your question, Claire, this is what happens when coordination is done really well. We could actually beat the right on this message. Coordination is happening really well amongst the right now on immigration. Well, back then, especially when you were in the administration, they really did it well. And throughout the Biden administration, we never saw that kind of coordination or pushback when all the attacks just kept doubling down. Even when they told us, even when Republicans said, we will be pushing back on our the top two issues are going to be immigration and inflation. They told us.
Yeah, it wasn't a secret.
Yeah. And I think Doug and Claire, I don't know how you all feel, but we kind of felt this inside the administration when we would do things that were positive and that were good, that were helping children, that were helping, asylum seekers, that were helping survivors of violence or trying to help naturalization applicants. And there was a real reluctance in advertising those things. And I never understood why. I mean, we don't have to talk about the border all the time. We can talk about, all the great things we're doing to help people who are here, the humanitarian things that we were doing. And it was really, really frustrating to me. But, Doug and Claire, I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
I have both thoughts and feelings. But Claire, you go ahead.
Obviously, thoughts and feelings. I agree. I mean, I think what you're talking about on the messaging discipline, they got so good at driving that chaotic open border narrative that, you would see it, even these sort of bureaucratic administrative process changes to just make everything better or to make the system run better or help, specific groups would be portrayed as open borders, right? Like we want to improve, the treatment of pregnant women in detention. It's famous one, open borders. They're going to drive pregnant women to the border, little tiny mundane things. There's news stories about this. We talked about what's called like a hard card, like giving people who are on ICE's docket, like a solid laminated document, right, that they could use when they went to check in. So they wouldn't have to bring all their papers folded up, which is what happens now. So it's being more secure, better for the government, better for the non-citizens. And it got lambasted as open borders, right? It was amazing to me how they were able to just use that even term open borders and apply it to everything in the immigration space, everything wholly separate from the border.
Yeah. And I think it's entirely possible that Elon Musk in particular and the right wing in general don't even realize how successful this was. They know how successful it was politically, but inside the government where we were working every day, there were many, many things, as Amanda and Claire were saying, that we wanted to get done, that we could not get done because the political powers that be inside that administration were afraid. Now, this is not totally insane. I want to say this is politics. I mean, we're all grown-ups, right? Like when you're in a tough election year, things get bottled up on the policy side because no one wants to, quote unquote, commit an unforced error, right? It's like save it till we win, and then we'll do it when we're not in such a politically sensitive time. And sometimes that makes sense, but it sure didn't make sense this time. I mean, Beatriz, I want to know what you think about this because you said citizenship polls really well. Everyone loves citizenship. Trump himself does citizenship ceremonies from time to time, probably to appease his non-MAGA coalition to the extent they still exist and to not look so hard-edged. But in any event, you had in 2024, Elon Musk completely mainstreaming the great replacement theory, which let's pause for a second. Talk about branding. Like, why do we still call it that? It is a white replacement racist conspiracy theory. I don't know, that's too many words, but it's not a theory in any scientific sense. It's this unhinged belief that the Democratic Party is deliberately pursuing open borders policies to bring in undocumented folks and turn them into U.S. citizens so that they will be zombie Democratic voters forever and create one party rule in America, right? Like that's the quote unquote theory. And he took it from whatever you were talking about, Rumble or whatever these dark recesses of the internet were, and made it totally mainstream. And we did not push back. And not only did we not push back, we weren't able to talk about citizenship. I'm talking about from the federal government, where the Biden administration naturalized 3.5 million people over 4 years, which is more than any other 4-year term of any other president. And it's not even close. And we never talked about it because of Elon Musk. Because the political powers that be, with their supposedly amazing political acumen, thought that it would be too contentious. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, this is, again, the inertia that comes from the Democratic side to touch this issue. Honestly, it's asinine. When I think about, first of all, I want to say that as much as I love some of the folks that worked in the Biden administration, especially on USCIS, you guys, you did incredible work. The communications job was probably the worst one I've seen in the administration. The worst one. And I don't care about burning bridges because it was.
Wow. The melting pot where the tea was spilled.
Yeah. And I had like some friends that worked there, but this is the worst. It was the worst. They did not promote anything that they were doing on immigration. There was nothing wrong with talking about naturalizing. In fact, I would talk to even our friends from the movement. I said, look, but every time that MPI, the Migrant Policy Institute, would come out with their big report on the administration, I loved reading it because it was all these. Look at what this administration did on the immigration system to bring it back from the dead. And that's what I'd tell our partners. I'm like, did you just remember Trump 1.0 obliterated our immigration system? They did such harm to our system, aside from the harm they did to people. That's all about like what it looks like today. I mean, I don't even know in the next administration.
Obliteration.
Yeah, exactly. We have to redefine it. We have to hold ourselves accountable as well as the administration, but ourselves as a movement. We did not do a good job about talking about the success. We were so worried about getting more and more done, and we failed to talk about the good stuff that was happening. And I kept telling a lot of our partners, we have to celebrate. Every time that they do something great, we have to celebrate it. We have to make a big deal about it because the other side is defining how we should be talking about these issues. And we failed. We completely failed. And that should be part of like the autopsy of how we look at things.
When are we going to get the real autopsy? Can I tell you something?
Yeah, exactly.
Before we move on, I just want to make 2 more very depressing points. One is that everything was backwards, right? It was the comms supposed strategy dictating policy. So there were things we were all ready to do, just really work-a-day, good government, nonpartisan, non-ideological things to help people naturalize more affordably and more effectively. And we couldn't talk about it. In fact, we, for the first time, made it cheaper in terms of filing fees to apply for citizenship than to renew a green card. Because a big barrier to citizenship is it's really easy to renew a green card. It's a lot more difficult to, pass the English test and the civics test for citizenship and so forth. And so we put out this huge new fee structure where if you read the fine print, yeah, sure, the sticker price was like $700, but 80% of immigrants were going to be eligible for a half price version. But nowhere could you find anything about that in any loud way because we had to keep it hush-hush. And so tragically, people were rushing to apply for citizenship before this new fee went into effect because they thought they were going to have to pay more, when in fact they were going to have to pay less. It was a deliberate suppression of just obvious transparency. So that was depressing. The second thing is, I was just reading Jonathan Blitzer's book about the history of immigration since the 80s and 90s. It's a wonderful book. And he talks about how in the Clinton administration, every time Doris Meisner, who was then running the Immigration and Naturalization Service, or anyone else who was trying to run the immigration system and do anything positive, anytime they wanted to do something, Rahm Emanuel from the West Wing would be like, no, we're not talking about immigration. So, I mean, this goes way back, this supposed political acumen of not talking about immigration ever.
100%. That's why every time Rahm Emanuel comes out, they're talking about his aspirations to run for president. I'm like, just shut up. Just go away. Go away. We could have had immigration reform done had you prioritized it.
Yeah, it really does feel a lot of times like we're in the politics of like 1996 and people haven't moved on to realize what time we're in right now. And they're still applying these very outdated rules, but also then being celebrated as political experts. So there's vibes, Beatriz, and then there's data. You kind of mentioned this earlier, but what do we actually know about how Americans feel about immigration, and how has this changed over time?
It's gone back to us seeing the majority of Americans seeing immigration as, when are we going to get this fixed? They're feeling that even more now because of what we've seen on the enforcement side of this administration, right? Everything from the raids, from separating families in the interior now, from detaining children, from killing people on the streets. The way that ICE has sort of redefined the moment in ways that we haven't seen before, right? In 2018 was family separation. Today it's ICE. But I think people have always felt the same way, which is, we got to get this fixed. What are we doing? And when you look at it sort of from the perspective of a Latino in America, they're seeing it twofold, right? They're seeing my family's getting targeted. It's not even safe for me to be a U.S. citizen because you're targeting me racially. But then the other part is, you promised us that you would do citizenship. You promised that you would focus on solutions, and you haven't delivered on these things. And now it's just getting worse. So I think we're back to where, or maybe not back, it's where we've always been, which is most Americans want to see this get resolved. They want to see, how do we define border security in a way that is both humane and orderly, but it doesn't have to be the focus. Yeah. I go back and forth with this, and I'll tell you guys this, the honest truth is, I'm zeroed in on making citizenship happen. But when it comes to the conversation of the border, I don't want to have it anymore. And I know it has to happen, but I just don't want to have it, because it's like you have all these players involved, and like, how do we do it? How do we do it? Just like, there's just so much more, there's so much nuance there. And I want to remove myself from that debate, because I think I was part of the problem. When I was talking to these campaigns, I was like, all right, so let me meet them halfway and say, look, you could talk about a balanced approach, order at the border and citizenship here. But they only picked up on order at the border.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, you know what? If that's your takeaway, I don't want to be part of that debate anymore. I'm going to focus on the people here and who have been here and waiting way too long, family included, for 20 years. I mean, some of my family have become citizens through their children. And you all know our experts, so you have to be 21, right?
Yeah, that's a long road.
That's a long road. I'm so glad you brought that up, because even policy-wise, and we talked to Esther Olivaria in one of our inaugural episodes about this, and border, even at the policy level, has always been a way of limiting your ability to do anything else on immigration. Like, even on the Hill, it's like, well, the border has to be secure. Well, we got to have this like big border bill, and we got to have a border. And it's always shifting, right? Like, how secure is the border? Oh, well, we need more security. And it's never, ever secure enough for anyone to do anything else. And it's really just been a way of not doing anything on immigration, honestly.
Nailed it, Amanda. That's exactly it. Yeah, that's what it is. It's just being abused. That's why I'm just like, you know what? I'm not going to debate you on the border, because you're stopping us from actually delivering for the people. Let me tell you, you want to win with the Latinos, you want to shift them, they have to care about the economy, but they also do care about immigration. What I kept hearing, and I would tell the Harris campaign, look, I got people on the ground in Arizona, Nevada saying, like, why should I vote for you guys when you promised us citizenship and you haven't delivered on it? And you gave these other people work permits, and my family doesn't have anything.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yes.
That's such an important point that I think has gotten lost. And there's no reason any normal person who's not a weirdo like us, would really understand the intricacies here. But like as we talked about, right? So if you've been here for a really long time, undocumented, there is almost no way to regularize your status and ultimately get a green card and ultimately get a citizenship. Our laws just totally prohibit it. And it goes back to 1996, goes back to a bill that Bill Clinton signed because he wanted to look tough on immigration during a re-election year. So history repeats itself, but it's just really hard. And in the meantime, in the Biden administration, motivated not by humanitarian impulses or fairness, but by a desperate desire to make the numbers at the border go down, the Biden administration started using this parole authority, which we have to always repeat, has nothing to do with criminal parole. It's just a really badly branded term for temporary permission to be in the country. And so all these people from Venezuela and from Central America and Cuba started to be allowed into the United States on a temporary basis as long as they had a U.S. sponsor, right? And they were allowed to get on a plane and come to the United States. And the second they got here, they were eligible for a work permit. So how do you explain that to somebody who's been here for 20 years that like, so you have to work in the shadows, you get abused by your employer, you're a fear of deportation anytime, but this other person who like just got off the plane was invited here, totally sidestep our normal immigration processes, has permission to be here, has protection from deportation, has a work permit. I mean, that must have been infuriating. And how would we have messaged that in a perfect world? Because, I mean, we could just be like, well, the Immigration and Nationality Act is very complex. Like, I mean, what are you supposed to say in a situation like that?
I mean, here's the thing, like part of the messaging had to be more solutions, right? I mean, many of us are trying to expand TPS. So,
temporary protected status. Yeah.
Yep. And that was one of the things that you can't, there is no messaging to undo that. We failed to deliver immigration reform, but how can we do better? And how can we talk about the solution? This all goes back to what I call like the saturation communications. It's like we needed to do more comms on immigration. We needed to say, look, we've naturalized this many people. We've made citizens out of external. We're working hard. Republicans are trying to block you. We never defined our opponent. Instead, you had Democrats trying to look for bipartisanship. I'm just like, they don't want to work with you on immigration. Stop. Like at least in the moment that we're in, if you want to win over people, you have to talk about what you've done and what your vision forward is, and make sure you define your opponent. And we've always failed to do all those three things on this issue in particular. And so we should have been a little bit bolder. By the way, I think the Biden administration, the work that you guys did and many they could do, Esther did, Tyler Moran was part of it as well. Like they pushed as much as they could. All of you guys did pushed as much as you could, but nobody was talking about it.
Yeah.
So it was just living in a vacuum.
Well, I want to, as a good faith gesture, try to present what may have been going on in the heads of some of the people not doing the messaging that we all would have liked to see, which is, so number one, I think a lot of people are learning the wrong lessons from the last election and saying, oh my gosh, Latinos swung towards Trump. And oh my gosh, like immigration's still a losing issue for Democrats. And I've even heard people who should know better in the policy and comms world saying, well, the American people looks like they're not as pro-immigrant as they used to. And it's like, wait, we're all looking at the same polls, right? Like if you look at the broad sweep of the last 50 years or whatever, it seems like a pretty tight correlation. When people perceive that there's a large number of people coming across the Southwest border without permission, which was happening a lot in the 90s, was happening a lot during the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, but really reaching an apex in the Biden administration. Yeah, polls show that a lot more people, when polled, would say, I think we should decrease immigration. Like there is a cause and effect there. Now, I think it's kind of darkly funny because these people were being polled about all immigration, including green cards and all the legal pathways. But in their mind, they were thinking people at the Southwest border, and the pollsters weren't defining the difference when the actual facts on the border appear to be chaotic. Is there any amount of messaging that can paper over that? Probably not. That's probably a precondition for doing any of the good things we ever want to do in the long term. But we kind of failed at both, right? Like we failed at the messaging and we failed at the policy. And now we all know what happened.
Yeah. I think there's two things I think that are important to note as well, which is one, yes, there was things happening at the border that made it seem chaotic. There was people coming in, et cetera. But it's kind of the chicken and the egg thing because we never started talking about any of the things that we're doing for the immigration system. I think people, and when I say talk about it, I mean really, really do communications work. Not just a little press conference, not just expect that the media will tell the story for you. And that is why I go back to what I said. I think that administration had the worst communication shot possible. It really did. Like, what are you doing? You think it's enough to just be up at the podium and, answer questions? Do you think you shouldn't be going on podcasts? You shouldn't be having, your own content creators telling this information? Don't you think you should be coordinating with other campaigns on really moving messaging on immigration? None of that happened. They did it for, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. They did it for the CHIPS Act.
Got them nowhere.
And they did it and it didn't get anywhere because they failed to address immigration. And that's what we kept telling them. If you don't talk about this stuff, if you don't hit them back, all the stuff that you're doing on the economic side, it doesn't matter because they're going to hit you back anyway with this. And so they didn't listen, and it's all of them. It's just not the administration that was doing this, but the coordination that happens with the folks on the advocacy side. Even today, and this is why I don't fully accept your premise, Doug, because it is the most frustrating thing to look at sort of our movement still treat this as a third rail issue. Even when weaponizing it against all of democracy. You have democracy groups still sort of not knowing how to handle this issue. Even the econ group still sort of like not thinking about how we bring immigration into the whole left movement and really know how to tackle this. Even when there's momentum right now, when you see people who are organizing, mobilizing, going to big protests, and when you talk to them, in fact, the American University did a poll, like an in-person poll of why people were coming to the big DC march, one of the big DC marches. The top two issues were Trump and immigration.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just happening there. It was happening across other mobilization movements. So you're seeing people care about this issue, but we are failing to double down on how we organize and communicate on this issue as a whole on the left side.
So coming into like where we are now, obviously there was a huge focus at the beginning of the year on ICE and immigration enforcement, which felt like a shift, and there was a lot more attention being paid. And like you're saying, at all the protests, half the signs are like anti-ICE signs, so clearly it was resonating. What is your view on that moment? What has shifted, and was it fully capitalized on by the messaging apparatus, and where should we take it?
No, I think there's real momentum still. I mean, the fact that, ICE and CBP didn't get more money in this latest DHS approach, I mean, that's a sign that shows that, one, people aren't going to hold their members of Congress accountable. So you see real momentum on this issue. Even in the primaries, you're seeing people who are boldly saying abolish ICE, or Democrats, deploying ads on people who have voted for that resolutions that says, thank you, ICE. So you're seeing accountability happen on the political side. There's a shift amongst the party and the movement itself on the left that they want to be a little bit much more aggressive on how we reimagine the system. I think ICE is just sort of like the way that we frame it, but I think people really want to reimagine not just enforcement, but the whole system itself, so that we never come back to this moment again. I think there's a real momentum, and we've been good at sort of defining the villain. The villain is ICE, the villain is Trump, the villain is Stephen Miller. And that has really sort of unite the movement more. I think we have to get the Democratic establishment there, though, the political operatives, to really believe that immigration is not a political liability, but a winning message.
Do you feel like some candidates who are not on what everyone would describe as the left, but are kind of more centrist Democrats, maybe even some Republicans, are kind of ahead of the professional class here? Like, after what happened in Minneapolis, it feels like we were hearing sometimes pretty radical things coming from pretty middle of the road politicians who knew where their constituents were at.
I think we still have to work on moderates. I think they see, we've gotten them to a better place to reimagine what ICE can look like. I still think that when it comes to how they're thinking about immigration as a whole, and I don't think they're as open to some of the progressive ideologies that we might have about how we want the system to work. But I think we've gotten them in a better place to be much more forceful about how we think about enforcement in this country.
Do you know what the polling was, like, in terms of how the general public felt about ICE when Trump started his second term versus after everything that happened in so many cities, including Minneapolis? So
immigration as an issue for Trump was one of his top issues. When he started at a high. I think he was upwards of 44% or something like that on support on how he was handling immigration and the border. Now, both those issues, I think border, he's still kind of on par, in the 40s. But now he has really, really lost support on his handling of immigration. It is in the low 30s, if not going to the 20s. He's taking, along with the economy and immigration, those are now his worst performing issues. The way that people have responded to what they've seen from Minnesota, don't forget Chicago, California, what they're seeing in other places. The fact that people are bearing witness to this and putting it all throughout social media has changed the perspective on immigration drastically. I talk about this all the time. We're finally seeing the left respond and talk about this issue, and they're using the visuals of the raids, the people at courts, in the schools, Alex Preddy, Rachel Good, all these people. The way they've captured it has changed completely how we're talking about immigration. And it's gotten people involved who weren't even talking about this issue, has gotten them involved. Everybody from Miss Rachel, content creators who might be talking about other issues are now saying, like, this is wrong. This is not what we thought this administration would do, but also that they didn't think this could even happen in our country.
Yeah. And, it really has seeped into the pop culture consciousness. As an avid consumer of Instagram, I follow a lot of content creators who talk about fashion and, music and gossip, and they talk about ICE. They talk about immigration. And I'm sure that's not a coincidence too. I know that there are probably a lot of groups who are educating content creators and trying to create that ecosystem that the right has, deliberately. But it's really been something that I feel has cheered me to see.
I recently saw for 2025, Resonate, this company who does social listening and captures the volume of what people are talking about. The issue of immigration and ICE was the top issue that was most talked about, the most trending issue and most talked about issue. So that tells you how important this issue became just last year. And I think we haven't lost the momentum into 2026, despite we're not seeing, all the killings, but people have really become just engaged in the issue because they're still seeing things that are happening. They're still seeing children who are being detained in Delhi. They're still seeing houses that are still being raided. Just because we're seeing the war in Iran happen does not negate that people aren't seeing this issue on their feeds. And I think that's something that we should just double click on, which is it's a difference between how just the media landscape has changed, the ecosystem has changed. And so that's going to sort of dictate as well how we message in the future. We cannot do communications 101 from the past. We have to really rethink of how we're talking about this issue and being able to really understand our fragmented media ecosystem so that we could prevent what happened back in the Biden administration, but also do better in messaging on this issue and making it a winning issue again.
I could just jump in with two things that I think are interesting. I love your thoughts on one. I think you're saying like a lot of the folks we're seeing are talking about ICE. It's falling in the polls, right? There's a lot of reaction. But then you have the Republicans right now in reconciliation funding ICE again at the highest levels ever, $38 billion, 3 years. So they won't even be dependent on annual appropriations. They're sort of just continuing to double and triple down. So obviously, I'm a little interested, like, why are they completely immune to the polling on this issue? And then also when you're talking about the media environment, all of the messaging that's also coming out of the government at this point, right? The constant barrage of messaging out of ICE. I was just at the airport. You got all those like, get your money for CBP home, right? Like there's so much money put into the like anti-immigrant, not just like propaganda, but all of that coming out of the government. So I guess my question is like, why isn't it impacting the Republicans? And how do you counter this, federal spending on basically advertising on top of obviously the political spending?
We'll see if Republicans aren't punished for this in the midterms, because if done right, I think the message that we have to get out is, especially when we look at DHS, right? We're giving billions more to these two out of control agencies while people are really struggling financially. And I think we've had a few members of Congress who have been really good at sort of spreading that message and really saying, look at how much Republicans are willing to invest in this agency that most of us believe should be regulated, should be reimagined or reined in or whatever you want to say. Meanwhile, you're financially struggling. Meanwhile, they're cutting taxes for billionaires. Meanwhile, they're doing all these other things instead of empowering you, the working family, instead of helping you cut your cost. I like to frame these kinds of arguments in threes, which is cost, cruelty, and chaos. This is all what they're doing to millions of Americans, right? They're making life more costly. The cost of the war and how it's impacting you, the cruelty of ICE, what it's doing to our kids, what is it doing to our families, to our American families, etc., or the chaos. Nobody likes feeling like there's so much chaos happening in their communities. Mm-hmm. So if they're able to stick to those to really show the impact of what Republicans are doing by choosing to support all these policies that create all of these things, cost, cruelty, and chaos, I think we have a real chance of holding accountable Republicans. They will feel the pain. I think they're looking at their polling, they're looking at their Republican primaries, they're looking at their Republican supporters as, they support these things on immigration, right? They'll make the case. But I think their case is very faulty up against the financial strain that people are feeling. And it's happening across the whole political spectrum. At Voto Latino, actually, we just did a poll of over 6,000 Americans and sampled over 2,000 Latinos. So it's a big poll. And what I saw there, those numbers, like 34% of people skipping meals.
My goodness.
Or over 30% of people, using programs like Klarna, where they pay later, or using credit cards, only having less than $500 in their savings. I mean, these are complete behavioral changes. And I think to myself, like, wow, the disconnect between our policymakers and Americans is really, it's acute, and it's an indictment of us as a country and how they're failing their constituents, particularly Republicans, right, who are doing everything to sort of give more money to awful policy decisions and leaving so many people behind. And so I'm hoping that good people, good candidates, and good policymakers are able to really acknowledge their pain and provide a vision forward.
Right. And, when you were saying that, all I could think about was the Met Gala. Yesterday, I was watching it a little bit online and just thinking it was very much like people celebrating in the Hunger Games while everyone around them is suffering, and and this spectacle is happening. And I love what you were saying about connecting immigration to all these other issues. And I think that's something that we haven't done well. I think it's kind of the way that, policymaking is just set up, at least in like the policymaking world, is like you do work in silos when you're working on policy. But I think we do have to break through all of that. And I just really love your message. Just looking to the future, looking to now and the future, actually, if you could get in front of a persuadable voter and you had like 30 seconds, right? What would you say to them to try and get them on our side?
Wow, that's a really good question. 30 seconds, an ad. I think I would tell them how are you doing? Are you any better right now with Trump and Republicans and the policies they've passed? If you're not, then this is what I have to offer is we need to get your costs down. We need to make sure that kids can stay together with their parents, that ICE isn't upending communities, and that you can go and pay for gas and your food without going into debt. We can do better. So how about you join us? I think that's where I would start. That would be my 30 seconds. I always say in any message, you have to acknowledge people's pain. People are in a lot of pain right now. And I really do feel that we're not doing a good job of acknowledging it, recognizing it, and then talking about what we can do to alleviate it. And again, it's about threading all these messages. We should be including in our economic and affordability messaging, talking about immigration. And how we do that is by going through to talking about the values that are important to us, which is always keeping families together. That is a potent message. People want to stay together, especially now that we're seeing that they're being separated in here, in the interior, in our communities, in our neighborhoods. So I think that would be my message. I would obviously workshop it, but that's the concept.
That's pretty good improv. That was pretty good. So on that note, as we are in a midterm year and even moving towards a presidential year in 2 short years, what gives you hope? What gives you optimism?
I think we're at a good point right now, as in, I know that people are feeling a lot of pain, but I do think that there is this sort of, I don't know if I'm vibing with it or I feel this way and I'm projecting, but I think people want real different and bold and out of the box change. And not just on our system of immigration, but just as a whole. Like, how can we really ensure that democracy is centered on people? And I think people really want that. They're feeding all the chaos, everything from, ICE in their neighborhoods to AI coming to them as well after them. Like, I don't know if you've seen some of the polling, but AI is just as unpopular as ICE, if not much more unpopular.
Wow.
My colleague and I were talking about it, like, hey, AI is beating us in unpopularity. I think people are afraid of what's next, which means that they are willing to sort of step out from the usual and want something different. That's why you're seeing all these kinds of candidates, like everybody from Mom Domney to, Plattner and Maine to other ones who are different, offering something different. And I think we have to move along that. I challenge you guys who are in the immigration, like, how do we think about our whole system? And I talked to my colleague, Carrie Talbot, who's also in immigration policy. I'm like, you need to be thinking about how we catalyze citizenship in a different way. How are we thinking about policies in a different way? We cannot be doing the same old thing. So I think I'm excited about what's next, in the sense that I think there's momentum to do something different, and there might be appetite from that. I don't know if the establishment is there with us, but I'm pushing ahead towards something different and hoping to break silos and bring movements together to be thinking about different. We can't be operating the same way. So that's where I have hope that we're willing to break silos and do some good trouble together in a different way.
So on that, I think we talked about how we need to have a variety of messengers. We need to have people saying the same things. We need to start talking about this in smarter, better ways. If people want to start doing that, or they want to learn more, they want to get involved, where should they go and what should they do if they want to start talking better about this or talking about it on their platforms, et cetera, or learning more about what they should be saying?
One thing that I really want to encourage folks to do is really please continue sharing the stories of those who have been impacted. The visuals, the stories are making a difference in how people are seeing who's being impacted. It's game-changing in how people think differently and have a vision of who is the immigrant in the U.S. and what that means, right? Because we're no longer talking about just dreamers. We're talking about people who are part of mixed status families, right? They're U.S. citizens who are being caught in the crosshairs of ICE or illicit policy, or everybody from like Haitians, TPS, like the SCOTUS fight, the birthright. All of these stories, both on the litigation side, but also on just what we're seeing in the streets, please continue amplifying those stories. It actually makes a huge difference. So don't stop sharing them. And if you want more of those stories, actually, I'll be launching soon the updated Disappeared in America website, which is a catalog of all the people, of public stories of all of those who have been impacted by Trump's policies on enforcement.
Wow.
So be on the lookout for that. It's a huge catalog, but there's also resources there that will offer for folks to share, but also to plug into actions, et cetera.
Wow, that is really an amazing project. Thanks for taking that on, and thanks for sharing with us. But most of all, thank you for being here and talking to us and sharing your wisdom and your brilliance. It's always a pleasure to talk with, like, I know people talk about competency porn. That's why they like watching The Pit, because people do, people are really competent at their job. So, I mean, I find this podcast kind of in line with that. And it's just such a pleasure to talk to someone who knows so much about their work and is willing to share it with us. So thank you so much, Beatriz.
Thank you. Thank you guys for putting your voice out there. It's important.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for melting down with us today. You can follow and subscribe to The Melting Pod wherever you get your podcasts. Our website is meltingpod.org, and you can find us on YouTube and Instagram. Drop us a line with any questions and let us know how we can improve the show. And you can check the show notes for organizations that are working hard to make our immigration system more sane and humane and that deserve your support. Until we melt again.